is Sophie Lawson from sophielawson.com, and this is episode 22 of the So Free Art podcast, which is a little podcast I do each week about art and things. And this one's going to be all about sacrifice and balance, which is something I've been dealing with for the past few weeks especially, and I thought it might make a good little podcast. So that's what the topic is. I think at the end of this episode I'm also going to do a little bit about another lucid dream I had, because last week's episode I spoke about a lucid dream where I went back into my childhood to try to heal something, and I had another lucid dream this week which was quite interesting, so I'll put that at the end of the podcast. But I thought I'd start with the main topic, because last episode I kind of got it all back to front. Oh, there was something else I was going to talk about. This might sound bonkers, but I'm going to be starting up the other podcast. This one is all about art. Well, it's supposed to be fully focused on art, but what I've realised is that a lot of things that don't seem to be art related are actually art related, like today's topic of sacrifice and balance. It's not really fully art focused, but sacrifice is definitely something that is important with doing art and stuff. So, but like in the future, it would be nice if I could have more episodes which are fully, more focused on proper art stuff, like pencils, techniques, tips and stuff like that. But what I'm going to do is when I started this podcast, which was about 7 months ago, I was going to do 2 podcasts, which was this art one and another one which was going to be focused on transgender stuff. That one might have to also be explicit, I'm not sure, because I'd be talking about stuff like hormones and it's stuff that I don't think would make sense to be on this podcast, on this art one. So when I first started this podcast, I was going to do them both together, but then I thought to myself that might be too much, and I didn't want to commit to 2 things at once. And also I didn't know if I was going to enjoy doing podcasts, so I thought what I would do is I'd get this art one done first, and if I enjoyed making podcasts and stuff like that, then I would bring the transgender one in later. So it feels like now is quite a good time, especially with all the things that's going on with my transition and stuff. It feels like now is quite a good time to start putting the transgender one out. So I'm going to record the first episode after this one. I'm not sure if the transgender one will be out this week or next week, but it's probably going to be going up on a Wednesday. So this art one goes up on a Sunday, and the transgender one will go up on a Wednesday, and you'll be able to find that at beingsofree.com. But I thought I would just mention it on this podcast, what I said at the time was that that's going to be, I see that as like a sister podcast to this one, but I said it's more like a trans sister, which I thought was quite funny, but it's not. Talking of sisters, I had this idea that I might, because I really do like podcasts where you have multiple people like talking. I think they can be a bit more exciting and stuff. So I was thinking about asking my sister if she would do an interview for the podcast. So I'm going to try and do that quite soon. Just talking about things, because she's a bit arty as well. She makes little like stuffed animals and stuff. So I'm going to try and get her on the podcast in the future. I think that'd be quite fun. And then that could also be sort of like practice for maybe a future co-host or guests and stuff like that. So that's a bit of what's coming up. I think I will jump into the topic now, which is something I've really been struggling with. And I've been thinking so much about it that I wanted to do a podcast about it, because what I've realised is sometimes when I do these podcasts, they're almost like therapy sessions where I'm talking to myself, and I'm almost talking about topics that I'm struggling with. And by talking about them, sometimes I seem to make sense of things, and when I listen back to them, I sort of think it just helps me make sense of things. So I'm hoping that this might happen with this topic, and it's to do with sacrifice and balance, and it's going to be covering things like video games, because I spoke about that last week as well, how I think I need video games in my life. So that's the main place where this sacrifice thing has come from. But if I go back in time a little bit, in 2013, when I started drawing, my desire to get as good as I could at drawing was so strong that it was stronger than anything else, and I just decided that I had to sacrifice everything. So what I did was I slowly started sacrificing all these things that I didn't think were going to get me closer to being as good as I could as an artist, and that was like watching TV, playing video games. And Formula 1, that was another one, because I love Formula 1, and I used to be obsessed with it. I had to watch every practice session and everything. But if you watch everything to do with F1 on a weekend, it ends up working out about 10 hours or something. And I just thought to myself, I love Formula 1, but 10 hours each week is 10 hours I could spend practicing art or something. So I actually was able to sacrifice watching Formula 1 live, and all I did was I started watching the highlights on YouTube and stuff. So that was one thing I did, which I've still kept to, and that was the first time, that was one of the first times when I realised that I actually could sacrifice things, because some of these things are, if you've been doing something for so long, like for instance playing video games, it almost feels impossible to be able to sacrifice them. And I imagine it's what somebody who's trying to quit smoking must feel like. There's a voice in you that's with playing video games, there was always a voice in me that was saying, play the video games. But actually it wasn't as hard as I thought after the first few weeks. But with what I've noticed is, with something like drawing or painting, doing the website, anything that's a skill that you want to try to get really good at, I feel like you are going to have to sacrifice things for it. But where the balance thing comes in is, I've noticed in the past that if I go and sacrifice, I'm the sort of person who's all or nothing, which is something I'm trying to work on, and that's where the balance comes in. So, if I play video games, in the past, I would go all in playing video games and sort of become obsessed with them. So I went to the extreme of getting rid of them so that I didn't have any video games. But if video games are part of what you enjoy doing, I'm starting to feel like you can't fully sacrifice it, because what I noticed was, over the past few years, having not played video games for ages, they just started to, the feeling of playing video games started to come back, and you can resist it. But I feel like the best thing, I guess everyone is different, but I feel like the best thing to do is to try to, or I'm trying to work out, is the best thing to do to get rid of anything like video games, and practice the art of discipline to say no and just not play any video games at all? Or is it better to allow yourself a little bit of video games and then maybe use them as a treat or something that you look forward to? So, because what I did do for a few months, actually I think it was about half of last year, what I did was every Saturday night I would allow myself 2 hours to play video games, and that worked out really well. But then when I started up this podcast, I needed a couple of hours to put the podcast together, and the only bit of time I could find was a Saturday night when I was playing video games. So I've been thinking about this a lot, trying to work out because I've got this feeling again that I want to give up and get rid of all my video games again, but then I don't want to get rid of them all to, in a month's time, start having the feeling that I need a little bit of them again. So at the moment I'm not doing anything, and I haven't actually played any video games since last weekend, so it's been a week, and I actually don't need to play video games. That's something I've realised. I am able to sacrifice them, but it's not whether I can sacrifice them. It's whether I should be, in terms of if it's going to create the best, healthiest life, if it's going to create balance, basically. So if I start playing video games, even that 2 hours a week, sometimes I feel guilty for spending 2 hours a week playing video games. So I think it's a mind thing. If I could just say to my mind, I allow you 2 hours a week to play video games, and that's okay, and then sort of use that as like a treat. So you could say, if during the week you do all these things which are going to help you become a better person or better artist, if you do those things, then I will allow you to play video games on a Saturday for 2 hours. Not only do you then look forward to playing the video games, what I noticed last year was it motivated me to do these other things, because I knew that I would be rewarding myself with video games. So that's the first thing. But then other things like TV and things like that, which to me, with video games, I find they are quite inspiring to me, because the amount of times I play a video game and a character will be really so amazing that I think I want to draw them. So I feel like video games are a way for me to get inspired and stuff. But with stuff like the TV, for me personally, there's nothing really positive about that. And giving up watching TV was one of the best things I ever did. And I noticed that I became a lot more positive once I stopped watching TV. So that one was quite hard to stop at the start. But once I'd done it, I would never go back to that. So I think some things are worth sacrificing fully. And I think if it's a negative thing, and I think you can feel that. It's all about a feeling, really. So if it feels negative, then it's definitely something to sacrifice. Whereas if it's something that you feel guilty playing, and maybe it's something that could be addictive, like a video game, I don't think that should be fully sacrificed. At least for me, I think the best thing for that is to get some sort of, balance. So what I noticed was this is very much with my transition. So for a number of years I was in denial of being transgender, and I would go for these periods of going all in and accepting myself, and then I would feel guilty and I would totally try to deny it. And then the more I tried to deny it, the more I needed it, which then made me swing back to going all in again. And it was this, for years, it was this pendulum swinging back and forth. And now I've managed to find a place of balance with my gender by just accepting who I am. And I feel like this is the same thing with video games. So, but then at the same time, like I'm saying, I can also see that you have to sacrifice. This podcast is crazy. I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you're trying to do something like improve a skill, like become a better artist, something you have to accept is that you have to sacrifice. But what I think I'm learning is you have to be careful of what you sacrifice. Because what I did was I sacrificed everything that wasn't to do with drawing. But then that ends up with something missing. So even though you're spending all your time drawing, you can just feel that there's something missing, and I believe you need to have balance, which means it's almost like that thing of work hard, play hard. It's like put all your energy into improving your art skills or improving your life, which is what I'm trying to do at the moment. But don't forget to play. I guess that's the thing. Sacrifice things that are bad and get rid of them, which is obviously easier said than done. But what I have noticed is that if it is a bad thing, like for me watching TV, once you sacrifice it, it will never come back, because it's just not something you need. It's something you think you need, but you don't, because it's a negative thing. You just don't need it, so that won't come back. But if you sacrifice something that you need, which you think is a bad thing, which like for me is video games, that will come back, and then you will be out of balance. But this is where it gets a bit confusing, because then you feel like you're out of balance. You don't want to go back to the video games because you've made yourself believe they're bad, and a lot of people think video games are bad, so you start believing that. But then there's something inside of you telling you that you need them, so you start having this sort of conflict inside, and then you go back to them and you start feeling guilty even though you're not playing them very much. They're in your mind now because you're thinking, should I be playing them? So even though you're not playing them that much, you're now thinking about them, trying to work out if you should be playing them. So this is a bit of a mental thing, but I guess the moral of this story for me is, it's to be an artist, or to improve your skills as an artist or anything like that, you have to sacrifice. And that might be for you going out with friends or something. Luckily for me, I'm more of an introvert, so that's kind of a blessing in a way, in that I don't really need to be around people that much. So everyone is different, but you will have to sacrifice some things. That's something. But like I say, I think you also need to make sure you're not you have to sacrifice the bad things, and I guess cut down on the good things that aren't directly getting you closer to being an artist. But then in that way they are, because I might go and play a video game for 2 hours and it might just recharge my batteries, inspire me, and then when I go back to my art, it actually helps my art. But then this is where the balance comes in. If I was to go and sit and play a video game for 10 hours, I might end that 10-hour session and feel like I've wasted my time, and then that's then put me into a negative mindset. So I think what I've realised right now is this requires discipline. It requires discipline to sacrifice things that you know are bad, and it requires discipline to cut back on the things that are not bad but are not 100% things to do with the thing you're trying to improve. I hope that makes sense. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. And I went through a period this week where I momentarily thought about getting rid of all my games again, and then I just said, I'm not going to do that because I've done that before, and I can't keep doing that. Oh, and then another thing is, because I spent a year not playing video games, even though I had the system, I was only playing video games for 2 hours a week. So what that did for me during the week was, it made me think to myself, I can keep this system and not play it. It's another mind thing. As long as you know that, because you know that you don't need to play it, because you've proven to yourself before that you can have discipline. So even though you're struggling at the moment, because you've done it before, it kind of helps you now. I guess this one should also be about discipline, really. Yeah, sacrifice and discipline. Maybe sacrifice and discipline equals balance. And I think this whole thing is about balance because, again, if you go all in on your art, which is what I did for a couple of months at the start of this year, I ended up getting burnout, and it's just, I feel like if you go all in on something and sacrifice everything else, you can risk getting burnout. But at the same time, you do have to sacrifice stuff. So it is a really complicated one, this. And I think it just requires getting a piece of paper and listing out everything that you want to achieve, and then working out what you have to do to achieve that. And for me, the thing that confuses me a bit more at the moment is it's not just to do with my art, because I'm doing a lot of stuff with my transition stuff. I'm having to, in a strange way, sacrifice my art in order to improve my transition. So even my art has now become something that I've had to sacrifice in order to get this other thing better, which is my transition to become who I really am. But I'm doing that because I believe that once I've reached a nice place with that, I'll be able to go back to my art and won't be distracted. It's almost the same thing with the video games. It's that if I go all in on the art, I'm not going to be able to do my transitioning as successful, so I'd fall out of balance with who I actually am. Whereas if I go all in on who I am, then I won't have the art, so I would be missing something. So even the art and the transition is a balancing act. This is what I'm saying. Everything is like a balancing act. And that's probably been one of the hardest things for me the past year or so. Well, actually, from, I would say, 2016, the hardest thing for me has been that I did make a decision to sacrifice the amount of learning I was going to do with my art, because I knew that this transition was going to require a lot of effort. So I struggled with that for quite a while, and then I accepted it. And like I say, once I accepted it, it was a lot easier. I guess I'm now starting to fall back into my art because I'm finding a lot more peace with who I am. I can almost feel that I can go back to my art now. So it's just this constant balancing act. If it sounds confusing, it's probably because I am a bit confused about it all. But like I say, it definitely requires something else that I've noticed. Something that really helped me was actually visualising. So what I did at the very start was, when I needed to give up playing video games and watching TV and stuff, what I did was I made the thing I wanted to do, which was improve my art skills, I made that more important and more emotionally exciting, I guess. I had to attach an emotion to it that was really powerful, and I needed that emotion more than I needed the emotion of watching TV or something. And then that just allowed me to give up watching TV and stuff, because I knew that I was doing something else that would give me a much better feeling in the long term. So that definitely helps. And something else that I've also noticed is, because I've recently been giving up eating chocolate and stuff, and that I found a lot easier than I thought by saying no. All I have to do is say no, but you have to say no before you get the chance of saying yes. So for instance, if I went into a shop and I saw a chocolate bar, and it's my favourite chocolate bar, so like it's, say, a mint Aero. If I see that mint Aero, I can say yes or no, but you've now given yourself the option of saying yes, so it becomes much harder to say no, because you've seen it and you can say yes. Whereas if you don't even go into the shop, if you say no to going into the shop, then you don't even give yourself the chance to say yes. So that's something else I've been doing at the moment, and that's helped quite a lot. But what I think is you won't be able to do that forever, because at some point you will have to go into the shop, and at that point you would have to say no when you can see the chocolate bar. But what I think is the more you say no before you even go into the shop, the more you're going to be excited with yourself and proud of yourself for saying no, that when you then go into the shop and you see the chocolate bar, you won't say yes, because you've now got yourself used to saying no. And that's what's happening with me with these chocolate bars. And I know it's only chocolate bars, but what I think is if you can do it with chocolate bars and stop yourself eating chocolate, again, like I said before, because you've proven to yourself you can do it with chocolate bars, which is kind of a little insignificant thing, it just all adds up, and you start thinking to yourself, I think I can say no to these other things that, like for instance, say going out drinking with your friends or something. If you knew that you had to do something with your art, you could actually say no. You'd be able to say no to that thing, even though it would be a much harder thing. You'd be able to say no because you've proven to yourself that you can say no with the chocolate bars. So that's another thing. It's all little things. I feel like everything in life all links together, and everything you do links together. So if I was saying yes to chocolate bars, I think that would end up somehow resulting in me not being as disciplined with the video games. So like this week, for instance, a couple of times I have said no to playing video games when I had a couple of spare hours, and instead I did my meditation, I was reading some lucid dreaming books, and I was watching a couple YouTube videos about lucid dreaming, and I did that during a couple of hours when I could have played video games, and that has actually helped improve my lucid dreaming, because at the moment lucid dreaming is the thing I'm most invested in, even more than my art and stuff. So I feel like by saying no to the chocolate bars over the past week or so, it's allowed me to say no to these video games, which allowed me to say yes to studying lucid dreaming, which then improved my lucid dreaming skills and actually resulted in one of these very powerful healing lucid dreams, which I'll talk about now. Actually, it's what I said about at the start of the podcast. So last week I spoke about how I was trying to go back to a childhood where I got strangled, and I'd been for years trying to work out where a lot of my limiting beliefs, I'm sure they are linked to that situation, but every time I try to talk about it with my therapist, that moment has been blanked out. It's like a traumatic event that I just can't remember what I was feeling or anything during that period. I can't even remember how long that strangling happened. I don't know when the date was. I know it was in 1993. I was 13. So anyway, I thought to myself last week, a couple of weeks ago, I thought, why don't I try to go into a lucid dream and relive this child abuse, like getting strangled? So I spoke last week about the first time I tried to, I was successful in doing that, and then during this week I actually had another one, which was a series of I think 3 lucid dreams with a couple of false awakenings. So lucid dreams are where you become aware that you're dreaming and you can start manipulating the dream. So for instance, you can start bringing things into the dream, and false awakenings are, these are really mad. These are where you're dreaming and you wake up and you feel like you've woken up, so you're just going about your daily life, and then all of a sudden you realise something's not right, and you realise that you're still dreaming, and that's really mad because it really messes with your head because you're convinced you're dreaming. No, you're convinced you're awake, but you're dreaming, and it's this really surreal feeling. It's very strange, but sometimes you have them where you wake up, but you're still dreaming. You think you've woken up, but you're still dreaming. So you wake yourself up, only to realise you're still dreaming, and these can go on for a number of times. And with this last lucid dream, I had 3 false awakenings with 2 lucid dreams. So the first lucid dream, I found myself in another house from my childhood, which is where I moved to after the strangling, and I was in that house and I realised I was dreaming, so I knew I was lucid, and I had put the intention in my head before I went to sleep that I wanted to go to this other house where I got strangled. So in the dream, because I knew I was in the wrong house, I walked out the house and decided to walk to the house I wanted to be in. And in trying to go to the other house, I had a false awakening. But during this false awakening, when I realised I was dreaming, I started to get this weird imagery where I saw all these weird shapes, like spinning shapes. But there was also this like figure of a man with a hat, very faint. And I focused on this man with a hat. And I was able to make that image clear, crystal clear. And then I was still lucid, so I said to myself, I'm going to unmask the bloke with the hat. And as I said that, it was as if there was a studio audience with me in the dream, and everyone started clapping and saying yay, as if you're gonna unmask this person, as if they was excited. And then there was another bunch of people who sort of went ooh, as if this could be quite scary. But I unmasked him by taking his hat off, and it actually ended up being my mum's boyfriend, who was the person who did the strangling. So I'm now in a lucid dream, face to face with this person who strangled me. And what I did was, I started strangling him in the dream, and then somehow it spun around, and I was now him strangling me as a child. And I could feel, and I can still feel now thinking about it, I could feel my little child's neck in my hands, because they were obviously his hands. So I was him and me at the same time. I could feel like my neck being strangled, and then the child in the dream fell to the floor, which is what happened. And then as this bloke, I ran out the door, which is also what happened. But the weird thing is, my mum wasn't there in this dream at all. And she was with my boyfriend, with my mum's boyfriend at the time. So it was a bit weird she wasn't in the dream. But I was now him running out of my old childhood house, and I felt really powerful, but I could feel how fragile that little child was, which was also me. And I'm not that bloke who did the strangling, but I felt how powerful he must have felt doing that, and I almost felt quite evil. And as I went out the house, the whole of my old street, my childhood street, was filled with candles, like lit candles, and I looked up at the sky and it was full of fireballs, almost as if like hell had come to earth or something. And running around the street were loads of what looked like zombie children on fire. But I wasn't scared at all, and because I was lucid, I remembered that you're supposed to go up to the thing of energy, whatever's got the most energy in a dream, that's where you can get the most wisdom. So I walked over to one of these like zombie children, and I picked them up right in front of me, and I said to this zombie child, "What do you represent?" And what they looked like, they wasn't actually children, they were weird. They were like dollies made out of fabric, which were on fire, and they were like flopping about again as if they were quite fragile. And I said, what do you represent? And this little dolly said, we represent, because there was loads of them, she said, we represent child abuse. And as she said that, I threw the dolly into the air, and all the other dollies, they started going, yay, as if we represent child abuse. Let's celebrate child abuse. Very strange. And then I looked across the street, and there was this lady who stood out because everybody else was like a zombie child, but she was like a zombie woman. And I said to her, what do you represent? And then suddenly she got on top of me and she said, she said something like, I represent man's desire for love or sex or something. And I could tell that if I stayed there, she probably would have started having sex with me. So I just said, this isn't me. And then that dream, I woke up from that dream into another false awakening. And then that went into another dream. And I was now back in the house that I'd been in before. Not the house where the child abuse was, but the other house, which my mum never lived at. But I was in her bedroom in that house, even though that didn't happen. And she wasn't in her bed, but I knew it was her bed. And so I walked out the room. I started shouting at this little girl, which made me feel really upset, and I said sorry to her. But I walked back into the bedroom and I said, when I walk into this bedroom, my mum's going to be in this bedroom. And I walked back in and somebody was under the covers. So I went over to the covers and pulled the covers back. And again, I'm lucid at this point, and I'm trying to find this person who I know is my mum. But as I pulled the covers back, her feet were at the top, so she had moved herself around to hide herself. And I started trying to get to her face, but she started moving as if she was trying to avoid me. And finally I managed to pin her on the bed and pull the covers back, and she was actually fast asleep. And I had this brief period of thinking I could strangle her, but I just said out loud, no, I love her. And instead of strangling her, I kissed her. Now this is where it gets a little bit weird, and I don't really know what this means, but as I kissed her, she opened her eyes, but her two eyes had become one, so she only had one big eye in the middle of her head. And I just looked at her thinking, well, I just felt really happy, I don't know why. And then I woke up from that, and I managed to fully wake up, and as I wrote all these dreams out, just like last time when I dreamt about this strangling, I just found myself crying as I wrote about it, but it wasn't like horrible crying, it was quite nice crying. So again, I feel like something was happening during that, and I felt a lot better since that. And yeah, as I've thought about it, I've started thinking like me becoming the person doing the strangling allowed me to feel what I must have been feeling. It also allowed me to feel what he must have been feeling, and it made me realise how much more powerful he was to me. Oh, and something else that happened was I woke up saying, I don't know if this was another dream, but I woke up saying, I haven't done anything wrong. Yeah, I think that was in that dream. I woke up saying, I haven't done anything wrong, and I thought, why am I saying that? And then when I thought about it, because my mum had said, I think I might have said this last week, I'm a bit confused when this happened, but I realised that I haven't done anything wrong, so there's no need for me to feel guilty for being strangled. So that helped a lot as well, and all these things are just helping me come to terms with whatever happened there, and I feel like I'm just letting it go, so it's helping me a lot. And I actually went for some more Reiki healing a couple of days ago, and I spoke to this lady who does the Reiki healing. She's a psychic, and I spoke to her about all of this, and I can't remember what she said, but she made me start to realise that I'm sort of looking in the wrong place for answers, and what I've realised is the place I should be looking at is the place where my dream has been taking me, which is this house that came after the strangling. I've had so many dreams in this house, which I've kept thinking to myself, why am I dreaming about this house? Like there's no reason for me to be dreaming about this house. It's been a bit random, but I've started to realise that I've actually got to dream. I've got to go into that house and ask questions about what happened in that house, which is when I moved in with my dad, because I think there's something in that house which is linked to some of my limiting beliefs, which I thought were to do with my strangling, but I realised by going into these lucid dreams and looking at this child abuse, I've realised that my limiting beliefs are not directly linked to that issue, and this Waiki healer, she actually allowed me to see that I was looking in the wrong place. And the funny thing is, the dream has been showing me exactly what I needed, but I've been so focused on trying to deal with the other thing that I was not even looking at what the dream was telling me. And so, for instance, last night, like I said, I had about 20 odd dreams. I actually had a couple of dreams in this new house, which is the house that's kept coming into my dreams. And some of my dreams last night were the most happiest dreams I've ever had. And it's because I was remembering that in that house I had at the time a little stepbrother, and again we were playing video games. We used to have so much fun together. And what I've realised is that we were helping each other. So it's starting to make me realise that we need people in our life, because it's people who have the power to help us, really. And I've just started realising that he has something important. It's like I'm still trying to work this all out, but last night was amazing because we were teaming up and working together, and I can't wait to have more dreams now, because I haven't had a lucid dream with him yet, but when I do, I'm going to ask him some questions. Like, I'm going to ask him what he represents, and it'll be quite interesting to see what he says. So this past few weeks it's been really interesting with my dreams, and it's also been playing into my waking life, because I've been a lot more aware. I am convinced that this life is some sort of dream, because some of the things that have been happening this week you could not make up, and it's all been things to show me that I need to improve my waking awareness. So as a random example, on Friday morning when I was working, I kept having this feeling that I was getting in everybody's way, and the more I thought that, the more I started creating situations where I was in everybody's way. But I was aware of the fact that I was aware of the fact that I kept thinking about this. So it allowed me to sort of improve it allowed me to sort of just, instead of judging myself, I was able to just observe and say, and I was able to look back and say, in this situation, you moved. This is going to sound mad, but say I was in a corridor and somebody was coming a lot towards me. Because I was thinking I'm in everybody's way, I would find myself moving in a direction to put myself in their way, which is really weird. And it's all happening subconsciously, but I was observing it, and like a split second after I moved, I was thinking I shouldn't have moved there, because by moving there I put myself in their way. So I was creating the thing that I kept thinking I was doing. Now what's funny is, I was able to think about this, and towards the end of the shift I was able to stop myself doing that. I was able to sort of intercept it, but then, because I do 2 different jobs, I went to this other job, and I'm walking onto the ferry, and what's the chances of this is, again, there's somebody who's coming out wheeling a arcade machine. So they're wheeling a video game system, which is something else I've been dealing with, and they were wheeling it right towards me. Now, had I been fully aware, what I should have done was I should have walked backwards slightly and allowed them to get off of the ferry with this arcade machine. But instead, because I thought to myself, oh no, I'm going to get in their way here, I I rushed towards them to try to get through the gap, which was really small. I tried to rush to get out of their way, but I ended up putting myself in their way. And that was one of those things. I started laughing because I thought, this is the universe. It's not only is it putting somebody with an arcade machine in my path, which, how random is that? It's also an arcade machine, which is a video game system, which is something else I'm trying to deal with. So it's when things like that happen that I just think to myself, the universe has got an insane sense of humour. There's something else that it did once when, because I used to have this problem of rushing around at work. I felt like I had to rush. And one of these quotes that's really helped me with that is, somebody said, when you rush, you delay. When you take your time, that's when you speed up. So I went through a few months last year where my awareness was on trying to slow down, to stop myself rushing. And one of the things I did, because at the time I was also very paranoid about my bald patches on my head. And this was when I just stopped wearing wigs and stuff. At the time, I don't think I was still going to work as Kevin, so I wasn't going as Sophie. But I was still quite paranoid about my bald patches, and I have one the front left and front right of my head. So what's funny is, the universe obviously knows that I had this thing about that, and I just sort of made peace with these patches on my head. I just made peace with it, but I rushed through the warehouse to get something, and I smacked my head into this concrete pillar. So firstly, I learnt in that incident that, if you're rushing, you're gonna actually hurt yourself. So that was one thing. Also, I learnt that I didn't have the awareness of the concrete pillar, because if I did, I would have made sure my head was lower. But what's really funny is I bashed my head into the pillar, and it really hurt, and I sort of put my finger up to my head. And I'm talking about an inch of skin come off of my head with a load of hairs on it. And when I looked in the mirror, it was directly in. When I looked in the mirror, it was literally right in the middle of one of these ball patches, but just to the back of it. So it's where there was still bits of hair there. So what ended up happening was, by that bit of skin coming off, which is not going to grow back, the hair doesn't grow back there, it's actually made that little bald patch a bit bigger. So I just started laughing because I thought, universe, you are incredibly funny, because what's the chances of it being that spot? And there's just so many examples of that where the universe, it's what people call the trickster. The universe is insanely funny. I've noticed that. It's got a sick sense of humour. But that was one of those moments that I learnt a lot in that incident, and actually that piece of hair and skin coming off my head also helped me be at peace with these bald patches a lot more. I'm still not where I want to be with those. I'm still working on those, but that incident helped a lot. And whenever I'm in that warehouse now, I'm always fully aware of that concrete pillar. So it's improved my awareness, and I also don't rush anywhere near like I used to. I've actually slowed down a lot in my job, which is really good. So I learnt a lot. I don't know where that came from, but I learnt a lot in that incident. And a similar thing is happening with these lucid dreams, where by going into the lucid dreams, it's actually improving my awareness during the day, which by improving my awareness during the day also helps my awareness at night. So it's just this loop whereby you're getting better in the dream state, and you're also getting better in the waking state. So it's quite nice how that's happening. Again, that really comes back to balance. I think everything is to do with balance. So this podcast is I think this is the longest podcast I've done, so I better bring it to an end. I think that's it really. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's another one where I feel like I sort of was talking without thinking, if that makes sense. So I was just I'm still trying to work out things to do with sacrifice and stuff. And I'm definitely going to do another podcast about this in the future, because I do feel like sacrifice and balance are key. So that's this week's podcast. You can find show notes at sofreeart.com, and if you have any questions or anything like that, you can email me at sophie@sophielawson.com, and I'll get back to you. And I think that is it. All that's left is this week's inspirational quote, which is another unknown, and it goes like this. To truly grow, you have to be willing at any moment to sacrifice what you are for what you can be.